Toby grew up in a modest home in the heart of a busy urban neighborhood. His family wasn't poor, but compared to his wealthy classmates, their life seemed simple and unremarkable. By the age of 10, Toby was no stranger to hardship. He had learned to appreciate the small things in life, like playing soccer with his friends and helping his mother with household chores. Toby often felt like an outsider at school. His classmates' loud laughter, their expensive sneakers, fancy backpacks, and their talk of family vacations made him feel small. He envied the fact that they were dropped off at school in luxury cars, while he had to come to school using public transportation. Toby wondered what it would be like to have all those things. While they played with their latest gadgets, he sat alone, wishing for a life beyond his reach. It wasn't jealousy, it was longing, a desire to be part of their world. Toby's desire for wealth and status started to affect his relationships with his family and friends. He blamed his parents for not doing enough to provide for him, criticizing their decision to remain poor while others prospered. He longed to mingle with the rich kids in his class, but instead he became withdrawn and isolated, spending most of his time alone, dreaming of a better life. Toby had walked this same route home from school hundreds of times, yet today felt different. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one darker than the last. His classmates' conversations about vacations to exotic places, the latest gadgets, and smartphones had pierced through him like needles, leaving behind a deep yearning. They lived a life that seemed so out of his reach, yet so close, so tantalizing. His gaze drifted to a store window displaying a pair of sneakers he had admired for months. The sleek, glossy design caught the light, and Toby couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of longing. He imagined how it would feel to wear those shoes, to walk into school the next day and feel the weight of the admiration he'd receive from his peers. As he stood there, lost in his daydream, a voice interrupted him, "Nice shoes, aren't they?" Toby turned to see a man, a stranger. The man was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with a graying beard, dressed in a well-worn jacket. His eyes were sharp, but his expression was calm, almost unnervingly so. His voice was smooth, with a hint of something Toby couldn't quite place. Toby didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded, his mind still fixated on the shoes. The man continued, his voice low and soothing. "I can help you get those shoes, Toby. All I need is a little help from you." Toby's heart skipped a beat. How did he know his name? The stranger smiled knowingly, as if reading his confusion. "You're wondering how I know your name. I have my ways," he said, the words carrying a weight of mystery. "But I'll introduce myself properly. You can call me Uncle." The name felt strange, foreign even, but there was something about it that seemed oddly familiar, as though it held some kind of unspoken power. Toby was about to speak, but the man raised a hand, signaling for him to stay silent. "What I'm offering is simple," Uncle continued. "Help me, and I'll help you get everything you desire. You'll never have to worry about being left behind again." Toby took a step back, uncertain, but the promise of something more, something beyond the ordinary, tugged at him. "What kind of help?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced. Was this a trap? Uncle smiled, his eyes glinting with something Toby couldn't quite decipher. "Nothing too difficult. Just point out the people who have what you want. I'll take care of the rest." The man pulled a thick wad of cash from his jacket pocket, and for a moment, Toby couldn't breathe. "Take it," Uncle urged, his voice softer now. "All I need is a little help. And in return, you'll have everything you've ever wanted." Toby's stomach twisted. His mind was filled with doubt, but there was something in the stranger's eyes, something that made him believe this could be his way out, his chance to finally escape the life he was trapped in. "Okay," Toby said, his voice barely audible. He reached out, taking the money. Toby didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he was willing to take the risk. Uncle's offer was too good to refuse. The money, the promise of a better life, it all seemed so close, so tangible. He walked home that day with the weight of the cash in his pocket, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. The next morning, when Toby arrived at school, everything felt different. The world around him felt larger, more full of possibility. He walked past the other kids with his head held higher, imagining their surprised faces when they saw the new version of himself. At school, he went about his day in a daze, the feeling of the cash in his pocket a constant reminder of the power he now held. It wasn't long before he found himself on the school grounds during lunch, and that's when Uncle's words came flooding back to him. Point out one of the richest kids. One who stands out. It'll be easy. Toby scanned the crowd of students, their laughter and chatter filling the air. There, standing with his friends, was Chitty, a boy who seemed to have everything. The latest phone, the newest shoes, and a cocky grin that made him stand out from the rest. Toby's heart pounded. He'd heard rumors about Chitty, about his family's wealth and influence. He was exactly the kind of person Uncle would want. Toby walked up to Uncle after school, feeling the strange pull of anticipation. Uncle looked at him with a knowing glance. Toby didn't need to say anything, Uncle already knew. Good job, Uncle said, handing Toby a crisp note. It was a larger sum than Toby had expected. His hands trembled as he took the money, and for the first time in a long while, Toby felt a rush of pride. With that money, Toby bought himself a new backpack. It was sleek, high quality, something that turned heads as he walked through the school gates the next day. It was the beginning of a dangerous journey, one that would change his life forever. The following days were a blur of new shoes, a smartphone, and a growing sense of pride. Toby felt like a different person, someone who no longer had to hide in the shadows. He walked through the school gates with his new backpack slung over his shoulder, his steps more confident. The whispering and glances from his classmates felt like validation, like he had finally crossed over into a world where he belonged. That afternoon, Toby found himself in the schoolyard again. He looked around for the familiar face of Uncle, who was always lurking just outside of his line of sight, watching and waiting. Toby had learned to trust his instructions, every move was calculated, every detail accounted for. It wasn't long before Uncle approached him, his calm demeanor unchanged. You did well, Toby, he said, a smile on his lips. The backpack suits you. Toby couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. Thanks, Uncle, he muttered, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Uncle studied him for a moment, then said, Tomorrow, I want you to point out someone else. You've done good so far, but this isn't over yet. We're just getting started. Toby nodded, swallowing the rising lump of doubt in his throat. He was becoming more attuned to the weight of the decisions he was making, but the allure of wealth, of belonging, seemed to drown out every other thought. Days turned into weeks, and Toby's new life took root. He had all the things he once envied, sneakers that glowed in the dark, a smartwatch that beeped with every notification. He was no longer the outsider, now, he was in the heart of the crowd, the one people noticed. It wasn't just about the material items, it was the respect, the admiration, the envy he saw in the eyes of others. Toby's classmates began to flock around him, seeking his attention, laughing at his jokes, praising his taste. They hadn't known Toby to be someone who stood out before, but now he was a leader, or at least, that's how he felt. The newfound popularity fed a hunger inside him, one that he couldn't name, but he could certainly feel. He no longer felt invisible. Yet, with every step toward his dream, something else started to unravel. Chitty, the first person Toby had pointed out to Uncle, stopped coming to school. Toby had noticed the absence but tried to brush it off. There was always a reason when someone was absent, right? But the days turned into weeks, and Chitty's seat remained empty. Soon, other kids seemed to disappear too, one by one, faces Toby had recognized began to vanish from the halls. The teacher's voice filled the classroom one morning. Class, I need your attention, she said, her tone heavy with concern. Chitty is missing. We're not sure what happened, but if anyone knows anything, please come forward. Toby's heart dropped into his stomach, but he quickly shut off the rising panic. It couldn't be related to him. It was just a coincidence, he told himself. The tension at school was starting to spill into Toby's home life. His mother, who had always kept a careful eye on him, noticed the changes. The new backpack, the expensive shoes, the gleaming watch on his wrist, none of it added up. She knew that Toby's family couldn't afford these things. One afternoon, as he returned from school, his mother confronted him. "Toby, where did you get all of these things? We didn't buy them for you." Toby froze, caught off guard by the question. His mind raced. What could he say? He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't tell her about Uncle and the decisions he had made. "Oh, Mama," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "one of my classmates gave them to me. They were just gifts." His mother frowned, clearly not convinced. "Gifts? Toby, your father and I work hard to provide for this family. If you're getting things like this from someone, I want to know who they are. I don't like the way this is going." Toby's guilt began to eat away at him. He wasn't lying, exactly, he had received the gifts, but he had left out the part about how they had come to him. He had left out Uncle's role in it all. "I promise, Mama, it's nothing. I'll be careful with it," Toby lied, giving her a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But his mother didn't look convinced. "I'm just worried about you, Toby. You know I always will be." Toby nodded, trying to push down the rising tide of guilt. The unease in Toby's chest grew stronger with every passing day. The disappearances continued, each one more alarming than the last. It was no longer just Chitty. First, there was Bola, then Zainab. After that, Michael. The names piled up in Toby's mind, each one representing a face that had once been part of his world. The connection couldn't be ignored anymore. The teacher's voice trembled as she addressed the class. "We're still searching for the missing students. If anyone has any information, please come forward." Toby felt like he was suffocating. The walls were closing in on him. He had been a part of this, he had been the one to point out the kids who had disappeared. The weight of it all pressed on him like a stone in his chest. He couldn't run from the truth anymore. But what could he do? Uncle's influence was too strong. Toby had no choice but to keep following the path that had been laid out for him. As the days passed, the pattern became unmistakable. The faces of his classmates, once familiar and comforting, were slowly disappearing, one by one. He couldn't escape the growing feeling that he was part of something far darker than he had ever imagined. His mind raced, trying to find a way to justify what he had done, but no matter how hard he tried, the truth gnawed at him. He was a pawn in a dangerous game. When Toby couldn't bear it anymore, he decided to confront Uncle. He had to understand what was happening. Uncle appeared, as calm and collected as ever. The man's dark eyes gleamed with something Toby couldn't name, a strange mix of kindness and cruelty. "You've been avoiding me, Toby," Uncle said, his voice smooth, like honey. "I thought we were friends." Toby shifted uncomfortably, the words choking him. I just wanted to know what's happening to the other kids," he said, his voice small, shaky. "Where did they go? Why are they missing?" Uncle smiled, he took a step closer, and Toby could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to snap. "Missing?" Uncle repeated, his tone soft, but it held an edge. "You don't need to worry about them, Toby. You've done your part. It's all going according to plan." Toby's stomach twisting with confusion and fear. But where are they? They're not just gone, are they?" Uncle crouched down to Toby's level, his expression softening for a moment. "Toby, you're just a kid. You don't need to understand all the details, okay? You just need to follow the instructions I give you. It's simple." He put a hand on Toby's shoulder, but Toby could feel the weight of the touch, like a chain holding him in place. I just want to go home, Toby whispered, his voice barely a breath. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want anyone to disappear. Uncle's face darkened instantly, and his grip on Toby's shoulder tightened, though still not enough to hurt. You think you can just leave now, Toby? He asked, his voice growing colder. You think you can walk away from all this? You can't. You're in it now. There's no turning back. Uncle's hand left his shoulder, and he stood up straight, towering over the boy. You've already made your choice, Uncle said quietly, a dangerous calm in his voice. You're a part of this whether you like it or not. You don't get to just walk away. Toby stumbled backward, tears threatening to fall. I'm just a kid. I didn't want any of this. Please, Uncle, please, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Uncle stood still, watching him. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked almost like pity. He turned and left. That night, Toby lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, his thoughts a tangled mess. He couldn't sleep. Every sound, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant hum of traffic, felt like a warning. He was no longer just a boy who wanted a pair of sneakers, he was now a part of something far darker, a cog in a machine that didn't care about the damage it left in its wake. His phone rang at 3 a.m., its shrill tone cutting through the silence. Toby's heart raced as he picked it up, his hands shaking. Don't think about leaving, Toby, Uncle's voice came through the phone, cold and calculating. If you do, you'll regret it. You think you can escape this? Think again. Toby's stomach turned as he heard the cruel laughter on the other end. He felt a chill creep down his spine, knowing that Uncle was watching him, always watching him. The kidnappings continued, and with each new victim, Toby's guilt grew heavier. He couldn't ignore the role he played anymore. The faces of the missing children haunted him every night, their expressions frozen in his mind. He knew that he had to do something to stop this, but every time he tried to take a step forward, Uncle's presence loomed large, preventing him from making a move. One fateful day, Toby found himself in the back of a van, sitting next to Uncle as they waited for the ransom to be paid. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Uncle sat across from him, a phone in his hand. We've got a new one, Uncle said, his voice almost cheerful. Another rich family who thinks they can pay to get their precious child back. Toby's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. He was involved in another kidnapping, another ransom demand. He felt his skin crawl, his throat tightening. This wasn't a game. These were real people, real families. This was real harm. Uncle pressed a button on the phone, and Toby could hear a voice on the other end, a voice that sounded distant, filled with fear. The voice was asking for proof that their child was safe. Uncle's face lit up with a sick grin as he looked at Toby. He handed the phone to the boy. Say something, Toby, Uncle said. Tell them everything's fine. That they can pay the money, and everything will be okay. Toby took the phone, his hands shaking. His breath caught in his throat as he held it to his ear. Hello. His voice sounded so small, so weak. Your kid is okay. Just send the money, and they'll be fine. He didn't even believe his own words. The lie tasted bitter, but he couldn't stop. The fear of what would happen if he refused was overwhelming. Uncle was watching him, waiting for him to play his part. There was no way out, no way to stop this. In the silence that followed, Toby thought about the families of the other missing kids, the faces that he would never see again. He thought about the fear he felt in his own heart, the fear of losing his family, the fear of never seeing his mother again. Suddenly, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. His heart leapt. The police, they were coming. He didn't know how, but somehow, he knew that he had to do everything in his power to get away from Uncle. Toby took a deep breath and made a run for it. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew that he had to get away from Uncle. As he ran, Toby heard Uncle's angry shouts behind him. But he didn't look back. He kept running, his heart pounding in his chest. As Toby rounded a corner, he stumbled into the arms of a police officer. The officer's eyes were wide with surprise as he caught the boy, clearly not expecting a child to be running through the streets alone. "Hey, are you okay?" the officer asked, kneeling down to Toby's level. I need help," Toby gasped, his voice frantic. "There's a man. He's been kidnapping people. I helped him. But I don't want to anymore. You have to stop him." The officer's expression shifted from confusion to concern as he recognized the gravity of the situation. "Don't worry, kid. You're safe now. We'll take care of everything." Toby felt a strange rush of relief, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He had made it. He had finally found someone who could help him. Minutes later, more police officers arrived, and they quickly surrounded the area, closing off any possible exits. Toby watched as they moved with purpose, their faces grim as they took control of the situation. Uncle's name had been whispered for weeks in the underworld, the man behind the kidnappings, the one who had pulled strings and manipulated children like Toby into his plans. But now, the tables were turning. Toby's bravery had sparked a chain reaction. The authorities were closing in. It wasn't long before Toby saw the flash of handcuffs as Uncle was dragged out of a nearby building. His face was twisted with anger, but there was nothing he could do now. The game was over. Toby had made sure of that. Toby felt a strange emptiness wash over him. Part of him had hoped to feel triumphant, to feel like he had won. But as the sirens began to quiet and the officers spoke in hushed tones about the next steps, Toby realized something. He had been a victim too. He was just a 10-year-old boy, caught up in a nightmare far beyond his understanding. Toby was escorted to a police vehicle, where he was taken to the station to give his statement. His mother was already there, frantic with worry, but Toby didn't have the energy to explain everything right away. All he could do was lean against the seat, exhausted, knowing that whatever happened next, his life had changed forever. The days after the police raid felt like a blur. Toby wasn't sure what he had expected, whether he'd be celebrated as a hero or condemned for the role he'd played. But in truth, he felt like neither. Everything that had happened was so complicated, and his heart weighed heavy with the memory of the children who had suffered, of the lies he had told, and of the choices that had led him here. His house, once familiar and warm, now felt cold and distant. Toby couldn't stop thinking about the time he had spent with Uncle, about how desperate he had been to escape his reality, and how easily he had been manipulated. One evening, after dinner, Toby sat down across from his mother. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face tired but kind. Toby took a deep breath. His mother was the only person who had been there for him through everything, the only one who had never given up on him. "Mama," Toby began, his voice shaky, "there's something I need to tell you, something important." His mother looked up, concerned. "What is it, son?" Toby hesitated, but then the words poured out. He told her everything. About Uncle, how he had done things he wasn't proud of, how he had watched children disappear because of the decisions he'd made. The guilt that had plagued him for weeks spilled over, but his mother listened quietly, her face a mixture of shock and sadness. When Toby was finished, he looked down at his hands, unable to look her in the eye. He was scared. Scared she would be disappointed in him, scared she wouldn't be able to forgive him. But his mother didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and placed a hand on his. "Toby," she said softly, "I know you didn't want any of this. You were just a boy, and someone took advantage of that. You didn't make the wrong choices on purpose." Toby looked up, tears welling in his eyes. "Do you hate me?" His mother shook her head, her voice filled with tenderness. "No, Toby. I don't hate you. I love you. And I'm so proud of you for telling me the truth. You did something brave, something that most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You helped stop something terrible. The weight in Toby's chest lifted, just a little. He felt like he could finally breathe again. It wasn't easy, and he knew there was still a long road ahead of him, but at least now he wasn't carrying that burden alone. His mother had forgiven him. And, in a way, so had he. Toby's story is a reminder that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, we always have the power to choose our own path. We can choose to let our experiences define us, or we can choose to rise above them. Toby chose to rise above, and his story is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the darkest of challenges.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more African folktales and legends. Help us keep the traditions of our ancestors alive by sharing our content with your friends and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.